my dad today. He asked me what I was going to be filming about, and I told him I was going to be filming a video on potato pancakes, which came out last week. So if you haven't checked that out yet and you have a lot of potatoes and you don't know what to do with them, make potato pancakes. They're delicious. And I told him that I was going to be filming about foraging, and there was a pause because he didn't exactly know what that meant. I guess I shouldn't be surprised by that because many of us are so far removed from these ancient traditions that our ancestors practiced and how they sustained themselves for years and years and centuries. We don't have that same need to root around anymore. Everything is so widely accessible and available. We can get bananas in the winter and pineapples. Food is plentiful. And when food is as widely available as it is and has been for like the last 50 or 60 years, you don't need to forage. You don't need to grow gardens. You don't need to raise your own animals. You just go to the grocery store when you need something. One way that people forage, or at least they say they're foraging, is that they're going to forage for their lunch, which means they're going to the food court and they're going to find something to eat. It doesn't have the same meaning anymore, and that's how a lot of people use that term. Maybe that's just my husband though, but that's how we used that term for the longest time, even though we knew what foraging meant. Now, why would anybody even want to bother getting into foraging when we have so much food available? There are several reasons to at least take an interest in foraging. So the first reason is self-sufficiency. When you are self-sufficient, you know how to take care of yourselves when times get tough. And right now we are looking at what could quite possibly be a food shortage, albeit a temporary one, if we are to believe what the news tells us, right in the face. And people who are self-sufficient, who know how to grow their own food and to look for their own food, they don't have to worry as much as other people. When you know how to source your food, when you know how to find food when you're hungry, that isn't a takeout restaurant, you're going to have an upper edge on people who don't know where food comes from. So being more self-sufficient, being able to find food, being able to feed yourself when times get tough will make all the difference. And it will give you that peace of mind that a lot of people won't have. Hopefully you will never need to put those skills that make you self-sufficient to use, but I'd rather be self-sufficient than not. The second reason why people should take an interest in foraging is that it's a way to get back to our roots. There's a lot of ancestral wisdom that we are missing today, and I think it has a negative impact on us. In the 20th century, there was a dentist called Weston A. Price who visited different indigenous tribes, and one thing he couldn't help but notice was how perfect their teeth were compared to people who had daily dental hygiene regimens that they were following. These indigenous tribes, the only thing that they did, they ate differently. They were following these dietary practices that their ancestors followed. And the way we eat is radically different from the way our ancestors eat. Now, true, not everybody was perfect. People poisoned themselves sometimes when they foraged. And there was a lot of malnutrition because people didn't understand things like vitamin C. So there was a lot of ignorance, but at the same time, people knew how to survive. It was a world where the survival of the fittest ruled. So when we forage, we're tapping back those ancient roots and getting to know ourselves in nature. And then there's also, of course, the natural roots that you tap back into when you start foraging, when you know with what nature gives you. There's so much power in what the earth offers you and to know how to use it. And that kind of ties into the third one, which is foraging will color your world. And what I mean by that is that when I first started learning how to identify plants, it was a couple of years ago. I downloaded a plant ID app called Seek by iNaturalist. I'll link it below if you want to check it out. And I started learning the plants that grew in my area, that grew along the forest path that I walked down almost every day. And being able to identify those plants without any help just colored my world. Like all of a sudden, these plants that were in the background that meant nothing, that were just there, they were just weeds that were growing, no name plants, no name nature. All of a sudden, my world burned a little bit brighter. And going on these walks became so much more exciting for me because I could see the plants growing through the seasons, and I could see something be like, ooh, there's garlic mustard, and oh, there's dogwood growing and common buckthorn. So that's how I first started getting into foraging. I just wanted to know what was growing around me, and it just had such a positive impact that eventually I wanted to learn if there was anything I could do with the plants that I was seeing, and that with the plants I was able to identify. And that leads to my final reason why you might want to get into foraging, and that is that the plants that you forage for, they're free food and free medicine to a degree. Yes, it does take a lot of work to forage because you have to clean everything and you gotta separate petals sometimes and leaves from stems, so it can be a bit burdensome, but it is so rewarding. I am telling you, being self-sufficient, being able to do something that a lot of people don't know how to do or don't even know what it is, it's a reward all on its own. For me, once I was able to identify these plants, the next thing I wanted to learn was just the next natural step. How do I use this? Is this edible? Is this something that I can use? And the first plant that I actually started using were the wild violets that grow in my own backyard. So I moved into my house in December of 2018. It was October when I put an offer on the house. So I had no idea there were violets. So when spring rolled around and all the snow melted away and things started warming up, my jaw dropped when I saw all the violets for the very first time. And just having that little background in foraging and just developing that skill, just that light bulb went off, like, what can I do with violets? And so last year I made a violet syrup, and then I used that to make lemonade and violet gin and tonics. And I actually have a video that's all about the 5 things that I did with wild violets last year. And then this year, of course, I had to use my wild violets again, doing something different this year. So right now I have white wine vinegar that is infusing with wild violets. I started this last night. It's already taken this lovely shade of purple, and that's going to be sitting in my fridge for the next couple of weeks. And then I'm also infusing raw honey with wild violets. So I really want to add some dandelion flowers in here as well, because it makes the honey all that more powerful with that wild flower power. Another thing that I foraged at the same time with my violets, I mean, it's backyard foraging, so it's as basic as it gets. It's not like I'm out in the woods looking for things, although I think I'm going to do that next week when I'm visiting my mom. But spruce tips. The other night my husband's like, our evergreen has spruce tips. And then all of a sudden, like, I didn't even think of them. I noticed the spruce tips, but it just didn't connect that I could do something with them. Although I love spruce beer, which is a soda. So you can make a flavored simple syrup with spruce tips. And if you want to learn how to make your own flavored simple syrups, I do have a post on that. Link below if you want to check that out. So I only collected a few, and I really want to pickle these just to have as a cool little condiment. Apparently you can use spruce tips like rosemary. I am drying these because I want to use these in tea. So last year for my birthday I was given a tea blend, a wild tea blend that's made of spruce tips, raspberry leaves, and wild rose petals. And that tea is so delicate and delicious and flavorful. Like, it's probably one of my favorite teas. So I would love to be able to recreate that. So I need to get some more spruce tips. I'm hoping I can find more at my mom's, because the thing about this, whenever I look up a new plant that I'm interested in trying out, I learn about it. So with the spruce tips, the first thing I did was learn more about spruce tips. And by doing that, I learned that when you pick a spruce tip, it's not going to grow back again. So when you pick spruce tips, make sure you only get like maybe 1 or 2 from a branch, and to not over harvest the tree, because you don't want to damage it. Like, you don't want to put it into a state of disrepair. So I was very sparse with my pickings. And then earlier this year, and I have to harvest more again because of course it keeps growing, is garlic mustard. And I have a video that's all about garlic mustard, so that's linked below. Garlic mustard is an invasive species in North America. It was brought over by Europeans in the 1800s. And you can chop it up and put it into salads. You can make pesto with it. You can make horseradish with the root. The whole plant is edible. And this is one of the first plants I was able to identify without needing an app. So the app told me what it was, but when I was reading about garlic mustard, I learned that the best way to like confirm that it's garlic mustard is to crush the leaves between your fingers. And if they smell like garlic, you know you have garlic mustard on your hands. Last year I had something that looked like rhubarb growing on my property, and I didn't know what it was. And so I did a very stupid thing. You shouldn't do this when you're learning how to forage and learning about plants and how to ID them. I ripped off a stalk and I took a little nibble, and it was very clear that that plant was not rhubarb because it didn't have that tart taste that a rhubarb stalk has. It turns out that the plant was a burdock. Burdock is the kind of plant that grows burrs, little clusters of burrs, and in the fall they start drying, and then if your dog is going for a walk in the woods and they come back with those little brown burrs, it's that plant. And the root is edible. So I had my husband dig that thing out. It had a huge root. And it went to waste, which is a shame because that root is edible. And I've actually bought that root before from an Asian grocery store to make a stew. So it is available, but I let it go to waste, and it's a real shame because I didn't really put two and two together. But there are all kinds of things growing in my backyard, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, there's probably something that you can forage and eat, but you need to learn the skill, you need to develop it. Right now I'm mostly focused on the edible side of plants that are in my area. So the other day I was walking in the woods, I noticed a new plant and learned that it's mugwort, and mugwort is edible and it has medicinal properties. Now the medicinal properties, I haven't focused on any of these. One day I'd like to get a little bit more into herbalism and learn how to make salves and different creams and ointments and syrups, that kind of thing. But I haven't really dabbled in that too much. I think it's a fascinating skill. Like when I have a cold, I usually make myself what I call like a warm elixir. So it's usually something with a shot of brandy and some lemon. If you have elderberries growing, you can harvest those and you can make an elderberry syrup, and that helps boost your immune system during cold season. Willow bark has anti-inflammatory properties. It was the original aspirin. Again, that's going back to ancestral wisdom. Our ancestors knew what plants to use and how to prepare them. But yeah, I really haven't dabbled into making salves or tinctures. It's something that I'd really like to get into one day, but I'm not there yet. So right now I'm just focusing on the edible parts because you always got to eat. But I'm sure there's a wealth of information out there if that's something that you want to get into more. If all of that is sounding good and you're at a place where you want to start foraging, I do have a few recommendations for you to keep in mind. The first one, I would start with what you know for sure to be what it is. One example that comes to mind right at the top of my head is that we all know what a dandelion looks like. And most of us have dandelions growing on our property unless we don't have a healthy patch of land. If your land does not grow weeds, there's something wrong with it, and it's probably because it's been sprayed to death with pesticides. I'm really sorry if you don't have dandelions on your property, because they're delicious. And it's funny because dandelion salad is nothing new to me. When I was a kid, my mom would sometimes make it, and I don't know why she made it. I think it's just because she knew how rich in vitamin C dandelion was, how good it is for us to eat something that's bitter. She knew how healthy dandelion was, and she had a way of making it delicious. Another thing that she would forage, and I don't think she was aware that she was foraging, like she didn't put a name to it. If she sees stinging nettle, she collects it, she dries it, and she makes herself stinging nettle tea. That doesn't happen very often. But it's the same thing with rose hips. If she sees rose hips, she's going to save those and drive them for tea. She loves rose hip tea. So I guess in a way my interest came from her without really realizing it until now. She knew how to get free greens and free tea when she wanted them. But I don't think it's something that she ever actively looked for. It's just if she stumbled upon it, or she just felt the craving for a dandelion salad because it was spring, she would go outside and get those leaves. So yes, start with something that's easily identifiable. Dandelions are a great place to start because the greens, you can turn them into a salad, you can wilt them like spinach, toss with some garlic and some lemon juice. You can turn the flowers into jelly. So I made dandelion jelly for the very first time this year. It tastes like honey. It's kind of like a poor man's honey, but it's absolutely delicious. It's a lot of work. So if you are able to get somebody in your family to help you with the work, to help you collect, and then at the same time you're transferring that skill down to somebody else or to the next generation. So that's pretty cool, because this is knowledge that we should all have. It's a real shame that much of it was forgotten and much of it has been lost on us. So I am doing my best to reclaim this skill, and I hope that I'm inspiring you to do the same. That's my whole goal with making this video. But yeah, there are all kinds of cool things that you can do with dandelions. And if you just go onto Pinterest and search dandelion recipes, you are going to get a ton of inspiration. And that's the same with pretty much anything that you forage. So garlic mustard, I have more garlic mustard growing, and I'm like, what else can I do with garlic mustard? Because I have garlic mustard pesto in my freezer, like enough for the rest of the year. I don't need more garlic mustard pesto. And I don't need more horseradish yet, but I also, I'm pretty sure you can ferment the root, so I want to pickle the root like I do with my chili lemon carrot sticks. Those are so good. I'm out and I need to make more. I really want to try pickling the root next. That would be so yummy. So that means I need to start foraging along the forest path. And right now trilliums are growing in my area, and that's one of those native species that is being threatened by garlic mustard. So really I'm doing a favor to the forest when I'm picking garlic mustard. A couple areas that I want to caution you about: always be careful with plant ID apps. Make 100% sure you are correctly identifying a plant before you eat it. Don't nibble on it. I mean, that's how the survival of the fittest works. Don't eat it. Be 100% certain of what it is before you consume it. Double check with a book that's on foraging or on a blog. Another thing is be careful when you're foraging for mushrooms. I kind of separate the two together because mushrooms can be highly poisonous if you don't know what you're picking. You can make yourself really sick with mushrooms. You can even die if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I love the idea of free mushrooms, but if I were to get into it, I would start off by taking a class on foraging for mushrooms, or I would go out with a guide, with somebody who can teach me personally how to identify mushrooms and what to look for. So that's just something to bear in mind. I'm sure there are classes for foraging as well that you can take, and that there are groups that go out together for foraging and to learn about it together. So maybe give one of those a look if you're more comfortable starting your journey out that way. So whenever I go into a forest, like I am on the lookout to see what can I identify, what do I know? And one thing I've been on the lookout for lately is for poison ivy and for poison oak. And one day, like when my little one is older, I'm going to show him what poison ivy and poison oak look like, so he doesn't stumble into a patch. And that's going to work in our favor the day we start camping together. The last thing you want to do when you're foraging is to give yourself an itch to remember. Like, you don't want to get poison ivy. Another thing to be careful about is where you're sourcing your foraged goods from. Make sure that you steer clear of roadsides, because you have the exhaust from roadsides, you have any grit from the road, you have dogs peeing sometimes. Another thing that you want to be wary of is if the area is sprayed with pesticides or not. I mean, most of our fruit and vegetables are, unless they're organic, are sprayed with pesticides and herbicides anyway. At the end of the day, it's just like always wash your produce. And I mean, you will, because most of it is dirty. Those are just some tips to keep at the top of your mind when you're foraging. Other than that, like my goal today was to get you as excited about foraging as I am, and as excited about learning about foraging as I am. Like, I have so much fun foraging. One of my goals is to learn how to use one new plant a year. So this year, the year of the dandelion, and I already kind of grew up with dandelion, and I mean, it's nothing new for me. I learned how to make dandelion jelly this year, so it tastes like honey, so that was new. And I made horseradish from garlic mustard, so that was also new. But there's a trail in my area. I identified mugwort with my app, but I need to look it up and make sure that it's actually mugwort, because apparently it is edible. So I want to learn about mugwort and how I can use it. But first I need to learn more. But At the end of the day, I think it is so powerful to tap into that ancestral wisdom that comes from learning how to forage. I started my journey a couple of years ago just because I wanted to know what I was seeing along the trail. And again, like, it colored my world. My world became a lot more interesting and I got so much more involved in nature. And when you reconnect with nature like that, it creeps into other areas of your life. So I started baking a lot more than I used to. I started cleaning with natural homemade cleaning products, and I have a video that's all about the ingredients that I clean my home with. If you're interested in ditching any chemical cleaners that you use in your home, I highly recommend taking a look at that video. I also got into fermenting at that time, just getting back in touch with ancestral wisdom and reclaiming that wisdom. I mean, that kind of knowledge has been so lost on us. Not all of us, like, many people know how to forage. Many people are self-sufficient that way and we're lucky enough to be handed down that wisdom. But there are people like me, like, I don't even know how to sew. So, I missed out on a lot of wisdom. Fortunately, like, my mom showed me that I can eat dandelions, but I think there's just so much power in taking it back and learning all about it. Even if you need to start from scratch, reclaiming that knowledge is such a powerful thing. It's not too late. We can learn and it'll make the world a better place, because when you reconnect with nature like that, you become more aware of your surroundings. You become more aware of what you're doing, what you're choosing, what you're eating, and it impacts you in so many different ways. Like, you're a lot more respectful. I'm a lot more conscious of what I'm doing. I do believe I'm going to leave off there. I really hope that you found this video useful. If you forage yourself, please drop a comment below and let me know what you forage for. Or if you've decided that you are going to start foraging, like, let me know. I want to hear from you. It really helps me out when you leave a comment, when you hit that like button, and also when you subscribe. So if you are brand new here, I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you do hit the subscribe button and bell notification so that you never miss an episode of the kitchen. I do put out one new video a week and a blog post to go with it. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and I will see you next week. Bye! And the first plant that I actually started using were the wild violets. To help with healing. Yeah, a lot of it was superstitious, to be fair, but I mean, you had herbalists who were burned at the stake because they knew about plant lore. In a way, it was kind of like the first pharmaceutical battle when you think about it.